Well, Bill, it's good to be back with you here. We concluded our last session there talking about this concept of new normal or next normal. And I think we're all sort of starting to get comfortable with the fact that when we return to the workplace, and we're all going to sort of do that in different ways and at different times, things are going to be different, and they're going to be different, for the foreseeable future. Whether we call that the new normal or the next normal, certainly how we interact with each other, what our spaces look like, what data we may collect about each other, how we instill a notion of trust, how we create transparency in the workplace. It's all going to be critically important. And, again, at the center of all of this are people, human beings, employees, our colleagues, our friends. You've been out talking to a lot of customers. I've been talking to a lot of clients as well. Maybe we start by sharing a bit about what you're hearing in terms of what the new normal might look like, and what are some of the considerations we need to be thinking about now.
To build on that, Yusuf, I think what's interesting is that today, companies are going to have to really think about questions they've never thought about before. Some questions like, for example, what is the role of partnership between the public sector and the private sector, and how do we operate inside our local areas and regions, with better guidance? Here where I live in California, for example, just yesterday we were given completely new guidance about some counties can open while others can't. And so this ability for us really to know the current state about what's happening, not just in our country, not in our state, but really our local area, even to a county level, I think are going to become super important, materials that organizations need to think about. I think the other thing that we need to think about is this notion of kind of entry and exit times into the workplace. It's been a long time since I punched a clock coming into a workplace, but that will become the new normal, I think, for a lot of organizations, so they can do a better job managing the density of how people come into the office. And again, one of the most fundamental questions that we've been working with a lot of clients on is, especially for those that are in the urban campus community, is with big towers and skyscrapers, elevator management. I know that prior to the crisis, going up an elevator used to be a fight for inches. Now it's going to be a fight for, managing minimal rates of travel and ensuring that we don't have too much, packed elevators anymore, inside of the workplaces. So this ability for, I think, a lot of organizations to really rethink the fundamentals of what does it mean to come into a facility at this moment in time becomes super critical for us to keep that practice of safety and precaution, in the forefront of our decisions. And I think this is really where we need to think about how we innovate, for the future. And when I think, truly about, some of the biggest innovations, things like shift management become incredibly powerful for organizations to kind of think about that net new normal operational standpoint.
But, I think you're absolutely right. And, in addition to words like new normal or next normal, I think we're going to start, incorporating other words into our vocabulary as well. Things like fit for work and, shift for work, to your point about scheduling. A lot of what we're talking to our clients about is you've got to sort of start to imagine day in the life scenarios as we move from plan and engage to reopen and re-engage. And, in a day in the life scenario in the new normal, you're probably going to have to put in a request for office space in a big corporate tower, like the places where I work or where you work. And, we'll be in a hoteling situation, and you're probably going to get an approval, or an invitation to come in before you're allowed to come in. We're probably going to have, fast track scenarios at security, so we don't congregate people around the security desk. You're going to be asked to, wear a mask. We're going to ask, to continue to sort of track movements inside the office. And so I think, in our new normal, we're going to have to get very comfortable and flexible with new processes and new ways of working. And certainly, by extension, the tools and the capabilities that we use are also going to have to be able to extend, which I know is something you're thinking quite a bit about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about, what we've learned and how this rate of the virus has kind of evolved over time for us. Things like, is it a 6-foot radius between spread? Is it a 3-foot radius between spread? And what happens when there is no more radius? We're going to have to also think about this adaptive as we learn more. Policies and procedures are going to have to alter a little bit. And so that's why ultimately you need a platform that is incredibly flexible, that takes these conditions of the moment but doesn't code them into digital concrete to then allow you to then alter them over time. And I think that's really important, for technology, and it's really important for business to be much more flexible, kind of as we learn these experiences. And truthfully, what we'd like to hope that kind of this we're in a state of kind of flattening our curves, or even kind of stabilizing our curves from even growing even further. The reality is that this may happen again. And the ability for us to manage these flare-ups and these pockets and these changes as we kind of evolve are going to become, new policies that need to be in our everyday experience. And I think that's certainly something that, many businesses are wrestling with right now. Is this a one-time thing, or is this becoming kind of a routine thing that we're going to have to address? So I'd like to tell people that, the tools are just as powerful as they can be. But ultimately, it's our ability to use the information of these tools, adapt it with the information of the moment, and then really provide that to become a better decisioning process for organizations at large.
But, like everything, it ultimately still does come down to people, process, and technology, which we've been talking about for years and years and years. And it feels like it's not going to be much different for us here in this new normal. I look forward to talking to you maybe a bit more about the technology aspect and actually being able to manage all this, from a central hub, which I think we'll do in our next segment.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.